morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I kindly ask you to slowly take your coffee to your seats? Thank you very much. Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Tea with Reason organized by the British Slovenian Chamber of Commerce and supported by our partner Nova KBM and the Slovenian Banking Association. It's great to see you in person, finally after a while, and I also welcome all those watching us online. Let me start by asking how many of you today drove here with your cars? Raise your hand. About half. So how many of you drove here with your electrical cars or electrical other vehicles? Just 1, 2, 3, 4. Not bad. And how many of you work for companies that have sustainability in your DNA from now on? Also about 1/3. Well, not bad at all. I'm asking these questions because today we're here to talk about climate change. And that is one of the fastest industries. Clean growth is one of the fastest industries in the 21st century. We're proud that our chamber has joined a campaign of 127 British chambers all over the world in a campaign for a greener future, which means you, companies, will have a voice and you will be able to tell others about your sustainability projects. We will also be asking you what you wish from your government and other governments, and we will take these policy asks and we will present them at the next big climate change conference, which will take place this November in Glasgow. And we expect a lot from this conference. It's the next big climate conference after Paris, with a lot of goals that we hope will change our climate. But I will keep all that for our for our first guest speaker this morning, and it's with great pleasure that I introduce Her Excellency, the British Ambassador to Slovenia, Ms. Tiffany Sadler.
Thank you, Barbara, for that fantastic introduction. I'm not sure I can top those questions to the audience, but thank you for inviting me today. I started here in Slovenia nearly a year ago, last October, and it's been a very, very odd year. I assumed I would come and do lots and lots of events like this, but actually I think this is the first one like this where I've talked to a group of people, as we are this morning. And what better subject to talk to you about than climate change and COP26? And who better to talk to about that subject than the business community, because you will be so vital to delivering change on climate change. You will be at the forefront of that, and it's wonderful to hear about Barbara's plans on Chambers Unite. So I'm going to talk through three issues this morning, and the first of those is why climate change should matter to you and your companies. So that will be the hard sell. Well, I'll be talking to you about why it matters. Now, I think most of you have a strong sense of that already, but I want to add some thoughts on that. Then I'll go into a little bit of detail about what is happening in Glasgow at the beginning of November, as Barbara mentioned, and also how the UK and Slovenia are working together on climate change, because one of my observations in my year here is how many different areas we are working on climate change together, whether it's scientists, whether it's industry, whether it's as governments. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about the how and how you as companies can get involved. And Barbara's already touched a little bit on that. So first of all, the why. Why should climate change matter to you and to your companies? So for me, there are two sides to this particular coin. And the first one is the moral case. If we don't take action to tackle climate change now, there will be irreversible change. We know that because the scientists tell us. And if one thing that COVID has taught us, it's that we should be trusting scientists when they raise a warning flag. Barbara and myself and some of you also climbed Triglav just a couple of weeks ago, and we went up to see the glacier on the top of the mountain. And I have to say that I was profoundly saddened, actually. That glacier used to be the size of 50 football pitches, and now it is just a few patches of snow on the ground. So change is happening. We've seen wildfires in California, down in Greece, just a few hundred miles away. The latest story I saw in the news this week, Lake Sirknitsa. I know it is a disappearing lake. I know it is meant to disappear, but this is the first time in 18 years that it has completely disappeared as a result of a lack of rainfall. This is climate change. This is change in weather patterns, and it's coming if we don't take action now. But the other side to the coin, and the perhaps more positive side to the coin, is that there's a real opportunity here. There's opportunity for you as businesses, for the UK, for Slovenia, to seize the economic opportunities here. As Barbara has already mentioned, clean technologies, this is the growth story now. This is where there's going to be new opportunities, where there's going to be new growth. And certainly the UK government is gripping that. Our Prime Minister has announced a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, because we see this as a growth story. We see this as the way that the UK can develop, create new jobs, level up across the country. So we're grabbing that opportunity, and I would encourage you as companies to do the same. So a little bit now about what is happening in Glasgow and at COP26. So the first thing to say is that this is a huge meeting. There will be 30,000 people coming together in Glasgow. I think we, as the UK government, have indeed perhaps been slightly surprised at the way that the world wants to come together and tackle this issue. It is the biggest international summit that we in the UK have ever hosted. It is a big matter. But it won't just bring governments together, it's bringing business and civil society together so that we can all act on this crucial global issue. We'll be looking to drive action to reduce emissions. We'll be looking to mobilise finance, an issue of importance to many of you. We'll be looking to build resilience to the effects of climate change. Glaciers on Triglav are one thing, floods are another, wildfires are another. And we are the presidency of COP, so we'll be acting as an honest broker, and we'll be looking to bring people together. A number of people have mentioned to me already this morning, this needs to be done in a global way, and we stand ready to do that. A couple of the things that will be discussed as Glasgow are a little bit behind the scenes, the plumbing, if you like. So one of those is what's called the Paris Rule Book, and that is how emissions are counted. Now, Slovenia is EU presidency, as I'm sure everyone knows, and they have an absolutely crucial role. So we as the UK and Slovenia have been working very closely on this matter of plumbing, and we're delighted to be working very closely with the government on that. But it's not just about plumbing, it's about building momentum. And my Prime Minister, he has a skill, I think, for bringing things together in a way that is nicely memorable. So I want to share the way that he talks about this with you, which is to talk about coal, cash, cars, and trees. So let me touch on each of those first. So first, coal. This is about energy transition. This is an issue which I know is important here in Slovenia. We need energy, but we all know that coal is by far the dirtiest way of generating electricity. We need, as a world, as a planet, to phase it out completely and shift to cleaner forms of energy. The UK, from our side, we are seeking to lead by example on this, and we've committed to remove unabated coal from our energy mix by 2024. I hope very much that Slovenia can take similar steps on that. I know that coal is a topic, as it is everywhere, which brings political and economic sensitivities. I'm delighted that Deloitte, a British company, has been involved in advising the Slovenian government on that. And we stand ready as the UK to help on coal decommissioning. We have a lot of expertise in that area, and I would be delighted to see British coal decommissioning advisors and consultants here. And look, there are alternatives to coal. That's the positive side here. There's wind, there's solar, there's also nuclear. And the UK is very experienced in nuclear. Around 20% of our electricity currently comes from nuclear. That's enough to power 13.2 million homes, to give you a sense of the scale. We've said by 2050 that we want to expand nuclear. It will be a similar share of our energy mix, but we need to double the amount of electricity that we're producing by 2050. So that means a lot of new nuclear. We are building new nuclear, and we'd be delighted to get involved here with Slovenia on the nuclear development side. So that's coal. Cash. So if we want to realise the goals of Paris Agreement and meet global net zero, that requires a transformation. You all know that. You know that transformation is coming. Some of that is about public, government, giving money in developing countries to support climate change. But a lot of it is about private sector financial decisions. This is about every financial decision taking climate change into account, because that's what we need if we're going to mobilise the trillions of dollars that is needed. And again, there's a really active dialogue between us and Slovenia on green finance. You have the EU presidency. You're driving work on EU green bonds policy, and we're working with you on that. London has a huge commercial interest as a centre of finance. We have a great offer on green finance. We want to work with you. We want to work with you on the political side, on the commercial side, and bring that offer on green finance together. It's a really, really interesting area of development. Cars. Barbara asked you the question of how many of you had driven in zero-emission vehicles here today. So if we want to meet the goals of Paris, we need to ensure that all new cars and vans, I don't know how many of you came in a van this morning, but also vans, need to be zero emission by 2040 or earlier. Again, we as the UK are leading the way on this. That's not because we want to be nice. It's not because we want to be helpful. We see an economic opportunity here. The world is going in the direction of zero emission vehicles, and we want to be part of that story. I know the car industry is a huge part of the Slovene economy, and so we want to work with you to transform your own car industry as well. The UK has lots of experience, for example, on charging points. This is going to be crucial. Having a zero-emission vehicle is no good if you can't charge it. Those of you who did drive here in zero-emission vehicles know that very well. So we want to work with you to develop that network as well. And lastly, trees. Coal, cash, cars, and trees. And trees matter. It's because protecting and restoring natural habitats and ecosystems is really important. I'm delighted that UK and Slovenia were both signatories last year of the UN Leaders' Pledge for Nature. That committed all countries to protecting at least 30% of their land by 2030, but Slovenia is way ahead of that. Slovenia is leading the way on this. You're one of the most forested countries in Europe. I've seen that myself. You stand on the top of the Triglav, everything you can see is trees. But alongside protecting nature, and that story about protection and nurturing, I think it's very important that local economies also see economic benefits from that protection. And the good news here is that wood is one of the most sustainable building materials there is. This is an area where the UK is also keen to share our expertise and to work with Slovenia. So lastly, because you are all business representatives, how can you get involved in all of this agenda? So as Barbara's mentioned, there's the Chamber's work, and I'd encourage all of you to get really involved in that. Some of you may be going to Glasgow, but those of you that are not, there's plenty of advice and initiatives that you can get involved in. The first of those is signing up to Race to Zero, and this means for you as your company, setting net zero targets by 2050 at the latest, and also having a credible short-term action plan to get there. There's efficiency of energy as well. We've talked a little bit about how you generate energy in a cleaner way, but actually if you can cut the use of energy, that's one of the best things that you can do to help tackle climate change. So I'd encourage you all to look at the way that you use energy and whether you can reduce that. It saves money too, right? So that's a good thing. Clean transport. Barbara mentioned how people had got here today. So those of you that have a large vehicle fleet, I'd encourage you to join the EV100 initiative. So that's committing to increasing your uptake of electric vehicles into your corporate fleet. Look at what you're doing with your suppliers. Look at placing requirements into service contracts for EV usage. Those of you that may be involved in vehicle manufacturing, and here in Slovenia there are a lot of those, think about committing to all your produced vehicles being zero emission by 2030. That's a big step, but as I say, it's in your economic interest. Finance, an issue close to many of your hearts. Think about how you can increase finance flows into clean infrastructure. Think about your disclosure, what you do on disclosure, and perhaps being disclosures in line with the task force on climate-related financial disclosures. And lastly, nature and trees. Think about how you can look at your supply chains, perhaps, and think about how you can remove commodity-driven deforestation from that. Set public expectations on your suppliers and with your traders. Think about land restoration and forest protection and sustainable land management. So I've talked about why, I've talked about what, I've talked about how. This is such a big topic, and it is such an issue which is so close to all of our hearts that I thought I would quote a great British speaker, Winston Churchill, and leave two quotes of his with you as I finish. The first one I wanted to say is that attitude, this is a quote from Winston Churchill, attitude is a little thing that makes a big difference. And for me, that's about how we tackle climate change. It's that attitude of seeking to make a difference and seeking to tackle climate change in all parts of our businesses. And lastly, another quote. It is not enough that we do our best. Sometimes we must do what is required. Let me leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. I really like these words that you mentioned in the beginning, green industrial revolution. That is the next revolution. Glasgow is indeed a very important conference, and one topic is cash. So government is looking to mobilize finance, and so today we're also going to talk about green finance, a very important topic in climate change, in supporting climate change. If we want to have this goal, net zero targets by 2050, government cannot do this on its own. It definitely needs to work together with business, and this is what we're going to discuss today. So it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Yuri Giacomelli, who will invite the panelists on stage, and he's the founder of Circular Business Academy and CEO of Giacomelli Media. I'll let you have the floor, Yuri.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Barbara Uraniak, the Executive Director of the British Slovenian Chamber of Commerce. Ladies and gentlemen, it's such a pleasure. So I really wanted to raise up to the stage immediately to see you all after this long period when we've been meeting online. My memories go back to about a year ago where we could first meet Ambassador Sadler, and we actually started to prepare for Glasgow quite early. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sadler, for your really insightful introduction and for the challenges that you set to the business world related to the targets that we can set and contribute what is required, as you said, citing Winston Churchill. So thankfully, we've got some very interesting speakers today with us who definitely lead the way in terms of systemic change, in terms of best practices in banking and in the energy sector, and among us there are many more of you who I hope will join the debate. We are going to talk about finance. We're going to talk about transformational issues related to the green. But what is and getting on preparing for Glasgow, which is a little bit more than 1 month down the road. So, but all this takes me back, 1 year when we were, under the conditions of severe lockdown, discussing green finance for the first time at such a level in this circle. And I would like to remember, a quote from one of our speakers who, unfortunately, I've just learned has tragically passed away. So one more reason to recall this nobleman, Sir Roger Gifford, who was the chair of Green Finance Institute and a prominent banker, one of those people who have been involved early in designing the regulatory framework in finance at the global level. And he wanted to challenge us by saying, the new technologies are already out there. So investors are motivated to invest in the new technologies, in the new ventures. But it takes more to really, there is a good ground for the new market, but it takes more to design it and to really open it and make it accessible for many more. We've got these examples with us today, so I'll invite them to the stage, and very prominent testimonies definitely. But before we go into this, we would like to show you a case study, basically. We'll show you a short video from one of our speakers who, unfortunately, due to still some difficulties in traveling, could not be here with us. Mr. Prashant Vais, who is Senior Policy Fellow of the Climate Bond Initiative, will present us with the initiative, which is an international investor-focused and non-profit organization working solely on mobilizing, a huge multi-trillion bond market for climate change solutions. So let's start with this. And I know that our speakers all have been involved one way or another in a very straightforward way in green bonds. So I'm sure this is going to be the thread of the debate today. Could we have the video, please?
Good morning. My name is Prashant Vais. I'm a Senior Fellow at Climate Bonds Initiative. And I'm really, really happy to speak to you here today. I'll tell you a little bit about Climate Bonds Initiative. So we're an investor-focused NGO with a mission to drive a trillion bond market for investments into climate risk solutions, covering both mitigation of climate risk and also adaptation and resilience. As an NGO, we have three main lines of business. Firstly, we've developed the well-known international standard, Climate Bond Standard, which identifies the uses of proceeds that can be used for Paris-aligned investments. And we run a certification system where we train up people to certify to this standard. Secondly, we have a policy team which helps develop policies internationally to help financial regulators, central banks, and finance ministries green their investment policies. And lastly, we keep track of all the various bonds and loans being made which are aligned to our standard and green bond standard more generally. What I wanted to do was spend a bit of time just talking about what we're trying to achieve out of the forthcoming conference in Glasgow, and particularly focus in on the objectives for private finance. So 4 of the particular objectives for the presidency which the UK holds is to improve the quality of reporting of climate investments and climate risks by the private sector, to make sure the financial industry is better able to manage climate risks. Ideally, we want to adapt policies so that returns from investing in green are enhanced and returns from investing in brown assets are reflecting of the risk and probably reduced. And largely, most importantly, we want to mobilize this $1 trillion of green capital. I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about how the market has developed, and particularly how important the policy making is to drive this forward. What we're seeing is an exponential growth in the amounts of green fixed income products that have been issued. So from something like $50 million US per year back just 2014, we've seen this grow to, we're expecting something like $1 trillion this year, and we've got over 1.7 trillion outstanding already. Historically, this has been dominated by green bond issuance, but especially with the pandemic, this has moved into sustainable bonds and also social bonds. And this is a sort of global phenomenon. We can see a wide variety of countries around the world that are issuing green bonds. Some of them using our own climate bond standard, but many of them using regional standards as and when they're developed and set up by regulators. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, the EU has been developing its own taxonomy, and the regulation came into force a couple of years ago. With this slide, I'm just sort of identifying some of the kind of key changes that are coming under the EU's green finance strategy. Increasingly over time, banks, financial institutions more generally, and large corporates are expected to use the EU taxonomy and set out and describe how much of their assets and how much of their loans are actually complying with the EU taxonomy. So what we're expecting next year is that each institution will decide whether or not it's eligible to be covered. In 2023, we're expecting all the large non-financial corporates to start reporting on how much green loans and green bonds they're issuing. In 2024, once banks have this information, we'll expect them to start looking at their portfolios to see how much of them is aligned with the green taxonomy. And by 2025, these will be included at sort of a global level in the KPIs of the financial sector. Some of the kind of KPIs for banks are looking at some of the kind of key ratios that they have to report to the regulator anyway. So, for instance, how much of their balance sheet is in green assets, how much new green assets in terms of loan flows are arising, how much of their off-balance sheet assets are green. So these are the kind of things that banks are increasingly going to be expected to report to and become aware of. One of the particular important ones is really understanding in your portfolios, in your balance sheet, how much of this is actually aligned to the EU taxonomy. And this is not just looking at the new loans, but also looking backwards at your stock of all the various balance sheet items, the loans you're making, the green mortgages you're making, the non-green mortgages. Everything has been covered. And at the moment, there's no specific reference to the sovereign issuance. So if your balance sheet has things like corporate, sort of government bonds, at the moment we're not expecting those to be identified. Everything else other than that. Anyway, that gives you an overview of some of the kind of exciting kind of requirements, both to identify your green assets, and more importantly, once this identification is done, increase the amounts that you're lending to green finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Of course, you can applaud. I mean, even though it was not live, you can pay an applause to Mr. Weiss, and who shared with us some interesting insights. So we're now going to elaborate the topic with our prominent speakers, and I would like to invite them all to the stage now, starting with Mrs. Stanislava Zadravec-Caprirolo, who is the CEO of the Slovenian Banking Association. Welcome. Good morning. Mr. John Denhoff, President and the CEO of Nova KBM. Welcome, Mr. Denhoff. Mr. Sibyl Svilan, who is the CEO of the Slovenian systemic bank SID Banka, as we know. Welcome, Mr. Svilan. And the CEO of GENI, Mr. Robert Golob. Welcome, Mr. Golob. Yeah, okay, yeah, and there we go. Certainly, we are going to start from the system onwards, right? So inevitably, we would like to, first inquire into the situation with Mrs. Zadravec-Caprirolo. Could you please share with us a little bit, an update? The European Central Bank, the EBA, and the European Commission at large have been leading a challenging transition in the EU, and as we have heard in the introductory speech, the UK has been just as ambitious, maybe more. I don't know. At the beginning of this year, the United States is back on the stage, has joined back to the Paris Agreement. Barbara said at the beginning, this is the next big conference after Paris, but actually Paris was COP21. Glasgow is COP26, so there have been some missing opportunities in between. So how do you see, related to the banking world, what are the upcoming milestones for us now that we have the EU taxonomy in place? As we have also heard this morning, we see that there's a clear timeline, that requires, at least in terms of reporting, some new elements to be added on and upon which we will build. So could you give us a short overview of where we stand right now, please?
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here in person, not from distance. Thank you also for inviting Banking Association of Slovenia to this event because, first of all, we are extremely committed to the green, sustainable, social, responsible goals of agenda of the European Union and hopefully the whole world, as well as Great Britain as our closest neighbor in the global environment. And this has been reflected in the activities of the Slovenian banking sector, not only words but also actions. Before I go to the overall agenda on regulation and other stimulus that is forthcoming in EU and as mentioned also hopefully globally, I would just like to take 2 minutes to mention that Slovenian banking sector was very early deciding to step into the goals of supporting with financing the sustainable, green and also socially responsible. That was reflected not only in joining the Paris Agreement targets, but also in producing own commitments quite early comparing to many other banking systems in the strategic level, as well as there afterwards in the banking products, while the regulation was still not making distinction and therefore the sector really put a special emphasis into supporting that through the banking products and not only on the strategic level. Now, it is clear that the financing required and calculated estimates tell us that there are trillions of financing gap or needs that should be on the global and also European level provided by the private sector and in financing the transition and the growth recovery after also the COVID. That also gave some impetus and stimulus to speed up the green targets that were already before in the agenda of Europe and also globally. And still, regardless that the importance of the capital markets in financing these goals is growing, as we have seen, green bonds as a capital market instrument is growing rapidly, but nevertheless, at least in Europe, presenting still minor share of the financing. So the weight and opportunity of the financing this transition and transformation, economic transformation, lies in Europe on the banking sector. Therefore, the milestones in adopted and in the process of adoption in the European Union regulatory context is extremely important to support the capacity of financing of the banking sector in a way that there would be benefits, financial also, felt by the real sector, by the companies that are to invest into this transformation really huge amounts if we would wish to altogether accomplish the goals of zero emission and ecologically neutral environment in Europe, and hopefully also other global partners will join this, maybe in Glasgow, this commitment by the targeted 2050. What we are, the regulation that is in place already was also mentioned already today, and is the one that stimulates lending into sustainable and green projects through reporting and disclosure requirements. So this is in place. First reporting has to start actually in June next year. So this is here. And but on the other hand, well, the taxonomy that has one piece of the real important elements that refer to, in place, that refer to not very detailed yet, but relatively detailed indicators based on which we could thank you very much, and sorry for that, based on which the banking sector could actually evaluate the level of transition or the level of sustainability of investment in, especially now, energy and coal sector.
So how banks will evaluate the level of green transition with individual clients, right?
Yes, absolutely. And this puts opportunities and challenges on the banking sector. This will affect the whole business of the banking sector from strategic point of view, governance, and also the whole process of lending, and not only origination, but also, you know, monitoring the whole process to the end, which is already now the case, obviously, but nevertheless monitoring the indicators that reflect or show the level of transition and the greenness of the investment, which means that the whole risk management of the sector will have to be completely, in a way, reinvented with these new elements. But that means also that companies will have to as well monitor their processes in investments in the way that they will be able to provide this data. So this is very important piece of regulation that is partially in place, and it's further on to develop for other areas of sustainable financing projects, but on as well one important piece of regulation. I mean, there are many technical standards also under preparation, but the very important piece of regulation that is forthcoming is the CRR, the Capital Regulation and Directive, that should also make a difference, allowing banks to import into the pricing these differences that are so important for our future living on this earth, either through incentivating through the capital requirements that should be, let's say, lesser for the green investments, or penalizing, I would say, using this populistic word, brown investments, or maybe look for some more innovative ways, of which probably will not be found, because at the end the money has to be saved, or some industries have to be penalized through the costs at the end of that.
Right. So we've got the taxonomy, which is here, which is being enacted, and on one hand the regulatory framework is also rolling on in the banking sector. Beforehand we've seen that this also impacts, of course, the bond market and how it is being transformed. But so the relationship between the banking sector and the real sector will definitely also be a huge impulse for the real sector. So there's no escape, basically, but there's a huge opportunity of, arising from the regulatory side. Just to mention, and you actually pointed at the fact that these things are coming through the European Green Deal, recovery and resilience plans, and moreover through the new industrial policy of the EU and the Circular Economy Action Plan, and there's more to that, of course. But certainly there are challenges in banks, and now we are going to move further to the two prominent bankers here at the table. I would like to know a little bit more about what you think about the transatlantic, engagement, but we'll come back to that. Before, I'd really like to ask Mr. Svilan. Mrs. Adravecka-Priolo has pointed out that some of the key challenges that banks are facing, And SID-banka has a very special mandate in the Slovenian economy and the banking sector as such, being the development bank, and it's also been the leader in the green transition. A lot of what we've heard is already in place at your bank. Is that so? Including the green bond, which was issued in 2018 already by your bank. Could you please summarize a little bit your early experience with, particularly in the field of risk management? We've been through reporting. Let's move on now to risk management, and then we will also tackle returns and mobilization, following the scheme of Mr. Weiss this morning. How do you see, particularly, I mean, standing from the risk management point of view, how do you see the developments and your early experience in this?
Good morning. Good morning on behalf of SID Bank. We are in fact, let me say, not only development bank, but our bank core business is sustainability. And we did that long years ago. We started with sustainability and circular economy maybe more than 10 years ago, even in that time when these things were not so popular. And we tried to introduce that in Slovenian economy, not only in financial sector, but also into the, let me say, company environment, in sense of that, to see how it's possible to finance and to ensure, because we are also acting as an export credit agency, how to ensure this business in sense to be sustainable. And of course, our experience of this 10 years is very, I will say, different from that, maybe what is on a first stage, because let me say, we have seen a lot. We have been acting on many places, not only in financial activities of different financial instruments, but also we have undersigned the Paris Agreement as one of the development bank in our club. But I will say following, today we are all agree about that, what is to do and how to do. We have also the taxonomy, we have also regulations, as Mrs. Zdravac already told you. But the key question is how to get there, how to get to zero, let me say net zero. And this is the main challenge and the main risk which we see, because, you know, you can put on a paper a lot of things. We did also 10 years ago, but we didn't realize a lot of that things which we would like to do it. Now, talking about that, how to get there, from our experience, of course, there are three main challenges which we have to take into consideration. The first one is, of course, that the financial instruments are just one part of that, but you need to come there. Because you can finance, and banks are, we have really very, very important role in that, but we are not alone, and we cannot do it alone. So the first question is what kind of instruments you're using. And this is our experience in this case, that maybe there are quite big differences among states and of course also instruments they are using by financial institutions. I will be a little bit more short because we don't have a lot of time, but just for example, if you compare Slovenia to other countries in Europe and of course also in the world, you will see that other countries are using more instruments that are based on blending, on risk sharing, and subsidizing some of the interest rates or guarantees for risk sharing and similar things. What here in Slovenia is used are more grants. Now, the difference is very, very important, because grants are in fact somehow one-off effects. You are using them just once. And you can support some of the industries or some of the companies with the grants. But it's much more important to have these blending instruments which you can combine with, let me say, public money, which is used in that, and with private money. Why is that so important? Because you have to crowd in the private money. And private money is based on economical, I will say, principles. And if you don't have economical principles, then you can make some of the, I will say, projects which could not lead to that what we want. We will not get there with subsidies. So you have to have really good instruments which will be used in this sense. What we are using in SID Bank is so-called financial engineering. That is blending, combining public funds with the private money and our money. And we combine that for years in so special funds of funds, which is distributing this money to the different levels and different companies in sense of energy efficiency. And we have some great examples we will be told later on. With Geni, we did something, and so on and so forth. The same is also for other things in transition. Especially important is that companies change the business models, because existing business models are more or less brown. As at the beginning was asked who is driving cars and so on and so forth. So I will say most of us, we are also brown. We have to take chance to think in this direction, how to change our business model, how to change our behavior. Now, going on the second question, that was risk management. This is even more important. Namely, we bankers, we are more or less dealing with risks. And these risks are normally so-called linear risks, which we all know. I mean, what means that is that, in fact, you are financial risk in this size. Now, this risk of transition, this risk of climate change are not linear risk. It's a circular risk, are different, are much more important, and it's not easy to assess them. It's not easy to do it like one. What we did years ago, 10 years ago in Seedband, we started with so-called 5-balance scoring. And we prepared different balances, not just finance balance. It's a balance about how to use sources. And do you know that the main problem in this transition is how to use sources on one side and how to do it with the sinks on other sides. So this is something what we try to do as a risk management at the beginning and to assess this 5-balance scoring for the companies. Of course, that's not enough. And today's question is, of course, how to make this new, it was already said, new risk management. Namely, it's really about new risk management, in change in minds. How you assess the climate change, how do you assess some additional things that were not there before. And the main challenge is how to integrate these things in risk management of the banks. Now, I will mention, if you allow me just a few words more, I will mention 3 big problems that we see or saw in the last 10 years. The first one is data. How you will get data about that? We have, in, let me say, our company, already these 5 balances for 10 years. We have done also together with you some special questionnaires and those things. But of course, you don't get all clear data about that. This is first question, how you can force, I will say, the companies that will present you the right data. Because if you don't have the right data, you cannot do it the second stage, that is assessment of this risk. The right assessment, what is going on. Because if the company will tell you that they do something green, but in fact they didn't, you are anyway outlost. Then the third problem is the methodology. What kind of methodology we will use. So we put in this 5-balance score some methodologies, but we find out that these methodologies could not make a difference, because why? Because a lot of companies doesn't accept that. Because if you say, let me go in this direction, how many companies are prepared to do everything in sense of sustainability, you will get answer in Slovenia about 20%, not more. What that means? That means that you have 70–75% of companies that you have to change the mindset, change the other things. Now, here is coming the next problem. That is, what kind of benchmarking you're putting. If you're putting this benchmark in sense of 1.5 Celsius, degrees in this sense, is that acceptable for all? And if you don't put it, then it's the question how you will then assess these things. So this is the point number 2, which is very important, and this risk management is changing now rapidly. And we are trying to help that also to the companies, and also we, I would say, cooperate in the Banking Association, because we also, let me say, increase these things and put forward also 5-balance scoring to the new ECG questionnaire, about 30 questions that to get this money. Last but not least is the question of reporting. And the reporting that was already present about the KPIs and those things, how to put that, that's a big challenge. Now, Last part, as you ask, is what the financial institutions can do to really get there in 20 years. And I will give you my personal view that financial institutions from banking side, which you are presenting, and Mr. Denholm, are definitely not enough. Why not? There are two reasons for that. One reason is the money itself is not enough. The main challenge is risk sharing. And risk sharing is the only thing that brings you there. Now, why is that problem for the banks? We have capital requirements. We all know in the banks that capital requirements are very strict. If you want to take more risk, you cannot be on the safe side on capital requirements. That means that the banks, although we have a lot of money, cannot be, let me say, the main driver in all the things to do it. We can do issuing the bonds, as we did at Seed Bank. We are the first bank in this region to issue green bonds. I can say something about that later on if it's interesting. But this is not the main challenge. The main challenge is how to bring the projects on their side and how to deal with risks. Now, who is dealing with risk? Except the banks. Capital markets. And capital markets is dealing with risk much more efficient than the banks. Why? Because the main reason of capital market is to share the risk. Why? If you want to make the transition, you need new technologies. You need new business models, as I said. And these new technologies means taking a lot of risk. Because you cannot do it that without taking tremendous risk. And to take risk, that is capital market functioning order. And London is typical example of that, which is, I would say, done that excellent. You are doing the job in this sense, maybe number one or maybe number two in the world. And this is the case where definitely it's necessary to be aware how to improve this on the capital market. Because sharing risk means including, crowding in private money. Now let me see the Slovenian situation. We have 23 billions of deposits. And Mr. Denholm will tell you later on how big problem is that, because he doesn't know what to do with that. But the problem is, in fact, how to crowd in these people in these investments. Because if we want to really to do changes, then we have to put people on stake, and they have to participate. And they will probably not participate through the banks. We can issue the green bonds, but they have to buy these green bonds. And that's the reason why the capital market and risk sharing in this sense is the very, very important things if you want to get there. Because this is the way how you can improve the technology development in the world. Last but not least, technology is not enough. Technology will not solve all the problems, as the bankers will not solve the problems. The main change is the mindset change. Namely, we have to know that we have to change our behavior. Technology will not change everything. And now I'm coming to question to you, what kind of instruments we need to change our behavior? Maybe these are not the financial one, but maybe they are. I will stop here in interest of time.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. This was very insightful, and thank you for the final question, not just a rhetoric one. We have heard that sometimes it's, we have to do what is required, right? So it was really insightful. You also provided not just some clear best practice from your bank in the risk management, but you also gave a significant insight into the mobilization. I think we have heard that we can share risk in many ways. First of all, blending instruments in a sensible way really is a platform for good policy making and involvement of different components of financial and financial real sector and policy making bodies in a more narrow sense. You have provided some answers to how you can price your services, distinguishing well between, as we popularly say, green and brown. And you are actually well ahead, so I really hope that your good practices can be distributed widely across the economy. as we know, it takes time, and certainly we cannot do it alone. Now, I would like to move on to our next speaker from the banking world, Mr. John Denhoff, the president and the CEO of Nova KBM. It has been a run. So, if I remember well, you acquired the bank in Maribor in 2016, 2 years before Mr. Svilan and the SID Banka issued the first green bond in Slovenia. And this is basically 5 good years, perhaps. And you've risen from less than 10% market share, if I remember well, to more than double than that. So congratulations, it's been a big run, but I've got the feeling that, you know, wherever I come and there's one of your colleagues speaking, this is the first time that I have a opportunity to speak to you, there's some good practice, you know, to be cited from what you've been doing. It's not just that the overhauling of the financial institution in a very short period of time. So we would like to inquire a little bit more, you know, also into the good practices in your ECG governance and so. But first of all, how did you do it? I mean, how is it possible? You know, 5 years and you're more or less the leading institution. Is there a formula?
That's probably a longer story than I have time for. But the fact is, we are quite used to transformation and to driving change. And so now that I think the bank will be changing hands once the regulators have given approval, we as a board are now focusing on the journey ahead. And as Tiffany said earlier, you know, in the words of Winston Churchill, it's not really enough to do your best, but to do what's required. I would even say now you have to do more than is required, because there's nothing required in terms of regulation or laws yet. But it will come. And I think the ecosystem is very strongly getting orchestrated for what will be a fundamental change, for sure, across all banks and eventually across all the clients and all the sectors that we touch. So it might be worth to hear a little bit of how we're initiating the change.
Yes.
But make no mistake, we are not a leader in Europe or in the world.
Initiating the change on the green governance.
We're taking the first small step of what I consider a really long marathon ahead. So let's just stress maybe one key point is there's a lot of work ahead, but every long journey begins with the first step. So our board and our bank is really committed to this change personally. And I think our motivation is simple. It's because we want to leave a legacy in this place, a better bank, a better business, a set of people who learned a lot, and importantly, we want to leave the nature and the climate better than we found it. So this is something that motivates us to do something. So then we said, as a board, we need to set up a proper governance. If you don't lead by example and make a big deal out of it, then your people certainly will not. And your clients certainly will do so even less. So you have to walk the talk, as many people like to say. So we set up a formal steering that's part of our bank governance. It's audited, it's visible, it's transparent. The regulators see the minutes. And that's one way we keep ourselves honest. So we set up a climate change and sustainability committee. We meet regularly. We have a lot of work streams that are now initiating. And much of the work that Sybil referred to is actually commencing at our end. We have a lot to do internally. But first you have to set up the governance. The second thing we did was we looked outside the bank. Who can we learn from? We joined recently CAFI. This is Climate Action for Financial Institutions Initiative. Also joining this particular forum as the Chambers Unite. These are good examples of places where you can learn from people who have the same problems. The CAFI, it's about 50 of the leading financial institutions in the world. So some of them have been working on this challenge much longer than us, 5 years, 10 years even, and so we can take best practices from them, we can work together, we can lobby together, and we can actually share a lot of experiences that are very relevant. So as we get going, we already see we managed since 2018 till now to reduce our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 36%. Mainly that was through deleveraging real estate, reducing paper, digitizing the business, reducing consumption, reducing car fleet, and just trying to focus on what also were very good business basics. But the real challenge that is really scope 3, where you have to impact your core business and you have to actually impact the clients we lend to. So as banks, we are the supermarket for money. So we do touch every single person in every single sector. And I think one thing that we were proud of, just to give you one example, is we reduced in our branches 80% of the paper we use. So I actually had the team add it up. It's 4,250 kilometers of paper if you line up the sheets, which is one round trip from Ljubljana to Glasgow and back. And this is just one example. We did more for client convenience, but it has a byproduct. You actually start to reduce your carbon intensity, your carbon emission. So that's the ultimate role and mission we have as a board, is through this committee. We want to drive awareness, and then we want to actually incorporate into the credit process real change around ESG. So on the scope 3 emissions, we are doing what a lot of banks are doing. We're using a lot of self-reported data from clients, but we're also cross-checking it with publicly available data. And we've taken some strategic decisions like, for example, EBA restricted list companies. These are big polluters. We will not work with them. We lose business. Probably that business goes somewhere else, but we have to make a change leading by example. And sometimes you have to let even a good paying client walk away if it's not fitting into your strategy. But maybe more importantly, there's a lot of high-risk, ESG high-risk companies that we do work with, and we will finance them if they're trying to greenify themselves in the right way. So this is a lot about what's their strategy, how are they seeking to improve their carbon emission footprint, and so on. So this is the type of thing we're doing in our lending policy, which is becoming very important. If you think about retail clients, we're also working on some things that I think will be the norm in a year or two for most banks. One is, if you look at the segment of clients, there's always two. There's the have money segment, and then there's the needs money segment. So the have money segment, they're investing, and they typically want to do the right thing. If you offer them green bonds or green mutual funds, they're happy to take them. But the big joke is there's 50 shades of green, just like the movie 50 Shades of Grey, because a lot of funds claim to be green. So what are we doing? We're actually setting up our own assessment framework. So there will be a Nova KBM overlay where we'll say, okay, this one claims to be green. It's not based on our standards. This one claims to be green, and it is dark green based on our standards. So we will make that information and our assessment available to clients. And the same for retail loans. For example, clients who want to take a mortgage, they have a lot of options how to build a new house. They can be eco-friendly, energy efficient, or not. So we will basically start to discriminate our pricing on loans against polluters, and we will encourage eco-friendly types of development. So these examples, I think, are norms of what will come to the entire sector, and these are things we're working on getting ready for next year launch.
Well, so sure. It is a credit process, of course, that where it starts, but banking is a relationship business, and changing mindset is a relationship issue, right? I mean, you can have whatever mindset you want, as long as you're alone in the room, nobody would be affected. But what you're describing is really getting into the change of mindset with your clients together, right? And I would like to, if you could share a little bit more how you envision this, and how is it going to the first steps. You're saying that you actually share your client assessments with them and actually advise them, if I understand well, this, by sharing information. How will this further evolve?
Well, if you think about banking, it really is a people business. At the end of the day, take Corona pandemic, you're advising clients all the time how to stay profitable, how to manage their costs, what's the cost of money, what are the trends. So it's not a stretch to bring ESG into the equation. And so this is something we can do because we control the price of money, we control access to funds, and we underwrite the loans. As Sybil said, we're taking risk. So we can trade some of that risk around the type of transformation we would like our clients to make. Just like with our staff, as I said, if you make a big deal out of it, people will follow. And I think the other banks will follow us, so I don't think we'll be an outlier. We just want to, follow the trend and lead the trend. But I do think it will be good business as well. So if you're the first to have green products on the shelf, clients who have that inclination to buy them will come to you first. So it's something that can be a race in a positive sense. But at the end of the day, it's our responsibility, and we're part of the community we live in. So you have to put the burden to some extent onto your clients. And this is what we talked about. Risk sharing also means having dialogue. It means explaining the context. And I heard Sybil say, okay, maybe 20% of the clients used to apply. I think that number will tend to be going up in the future. Most of the clients I talk to, and almost all the shareholders I talk to, are actually becoming more and more onboarded to this. They just don't know what it means for them today. But anyway, there's a long journey ahead. And maybe just one more aspect, and I could turn the mic over to somebody else, but this whole area of green finance is also very interesting for banks. One thing that we do, for example, working with Sydbank, is we borrow long-term money. And some of the things we do is we have requirements to make sure that money is redeployed into eco-friendly projects. So we have about 86 projects running just from the loans we take from Sydbank, which is about 50 million, and it's an ever-growing number. But the same thing applies to our capital raising activities. We had a Tier 2 issuance back in 2019. We had a more recent one where we're doing an S&P issuance right now, and we're requiring that more and more of these redeployments are also eco-friendly, energy-efficient type of investments. It might be real estate with proper energy consumption and setup, or it might be other projects. But these types of things are interesting ways that banks can, if you have this policy, you have this mindset, you can lead by example.
Excellent. As a seasoned transformation manager, and of course, Mr. Golob is also a successful transformation management. So I'm taking it from you, and then of course I'll try to inquire into Mr. Golob's practices as well. You mentioned that you started from the governance, and there's this climate change and sustainability committee in your bank. Could you explain a little bit, how it works? It seems like a horizontal body, quite engaging internally. But is it? What about?
Well, there's an old joke.
Yeah,
there's an old joke that says, if you don't know what to do, set up a committee. But this is not what I'm saying. I'm saying just the opposite. You have to yourself put time and skin in the game. So our committee is comprised of all of our board members. All of us have a role in the climate change and sustainability agenda. So it doesn't really mean a lot just meeting and having coffee and talking about it unless you're coming out with concrete action plans. That means dedicating resources, that means dedicating your personal time, and that means following up that all the initiatives are progressing. And here, I think, as we heard from Stanislava at Bank of Slovenia, the Association of Banks, ECB, are all starting to orchestrate together. For example, banks recently did a self-assessment. We assessed ourselves as rather weak in the ESG agenda. But the point is there's a lot to do, and we know what to do. So we're getting a sense of what will come in fashion, what will be required by the regulators down the road, and we're orchestrating ourselves to just be ready for it. So it's the same skill as transforming the bank business model. You need clear vision, you need inspiration, and you need action planning. And then you follow up and you have metrics like crazy. It's very simple.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Golob. Finally, we are coming to the real sector. And we know you as a sharp transformation manager and also a sharp protagonist of in the business environment as such. So I would like to start by inquiring into your thoughts about where we stand right now, Slovenia and the European Union at large, but particularly the Slovenian environment through your clients, through your experience. Where do we stand now, and what may be the next turning points on our journey, please?
How much time do we have?
You've got some.
Okay, there's
3 minutes and a half, and then we'll see whether you get some extension, please.
Okay, plenty of road ahead, but being inspired by what Madam Ambassador was saying, I will try to borrow some of the ideas. Attitude and requirement, I will talk about attitude only. Requirements do not apply to Geni. We don't need them. So it's all about attitude, first. Second, I was inspired about those 4 C's. I will come up with 3 C's of my own. First one is the company within. Second one is the cash, obviously, investments. And the third one is customers, clients, whatever you might call them. I could rephrase it in 3 P's: people, policy internally, and partners, but it's the same story. all over again. I'll start with the first one, people, the company. Yes, whatever John was trying to tell you, he is more than right. You need to start from within. Within means it starts at the top, and everyone needs to get involved within the company. There is a variety of measures you can implement, but you need to take them all. And if that means that you need to grow your own food, because some employees want to have their own garden, go ahead, do it. It works. If you want to do the recycling, the waste recycling within the company, do it. If you're going to go, just energy efficiency, do it. At the end of the day, it all pays off. And if you want to win the war for the talent, do it. Because especially young people, they want to know why they come to work. And they want to make the world a better place. Much more than we, older ones. But they really want to see the meaning of their work. Second one is the cash. You need to engage fully whatever money you put in anything. Is it R&D? Is it automation? Is it investment? It's all either digital or green. Why I say either? Because they support each other. Whatever is digital, it can become green anytime. And whatever is green needs to go digital in order to be efficient. So you do, and whichever money you invest, you just invest in those two. And the risks that Sibyl was speaking about, they're really not so big. Really, my personal opinion is there is more risk sticking to your existing business model, because linear risk management doesn't work. Whenever a black swan is on the horizon, it just poof, all the policies, they just go off. And there is less risk in being progressive and being proactive than staying put all the time. You can apply it to your private life, and of course you understand when I'm speaking. The same goes to business. And the third one is the customers. Once you get your employees behind you and you start investing your money in your products that are green, it's so much easier to really address the future needs of your customers. So instead of, swimming in the red ocean with all the other sharks, I will not even say you find a blue ocean. No, you find a green one. And that's the one beyond the horizon where the sun is shining all the time, and it's so much fun. And you can see that I'm having fun. And at my company, we're having time of our life because we're proud of what we do, and we're doing the best of all time in terms of financial returns. So it goes together. You can have fun, you can be proud of what you do, and you can earn lots of cash. And you invest it further, you make it more. So it actually works. There is absolutely no need to stick to your zone of comfort. It's to your own detriment if you stick to it. Go ahead, go green. Buy a new electric car. It's really fun to drive, believe me.
Very well. Very well. So good reference to encouragement to abandon, the fear for embracing circle risks or green risks, as we want to call it, and really, becoming more aware of that we are in a risky position if we don't do that. How do you see, through your clients and through your transformational projects, what is your largest challenge in your sector that you are engaged right now?
In Green Ocean, there is no challenge, it's only opportunities.
Opportunity. I like the word problem when I talk about it. You choose between these three words. So what is the best thing that you are doing now?
Okay, so you're asking me about our new projects in terms of customer projects?
Yes.
Okay, I think that the next big thing in Slovenia in energy markets next year is going to be community solar.
Yes.
That's how you mobilize and crowd the people's money, and that's how you make a real impact in terms of big impact. Because if you want to go solar on a nation scale, then just do it individual household solar top installations. It's not good enough. You need to go bigger. And the solar community is the answer to go bigger. Not utility scale, but that's because in utility scale, you cannot crowd the people's money, and you cannot really engage your customers in the proper way.
Great.
But community, yep.
So you are into mobilization, right?
Wait for a month or two and you'll know more about it.
Okay, so you are announcing your new project that will touch ground in a month time?
No, that's too ambitious. Maybe like in 5 weeks.
Okay, okay. I think Mr. Svilan would like to join in, and please.
Yeah, well, if you allowed me, I agree with you. I mean, linear risks are really problematic, and I agree completely that we are down to the tubes when we are just following that. The best example, I think, is, I would say, to talk not just about Slovenia, Pacific Gas and Electric Company, as you know, in California, get bust because of this linear risk, because they didn't take in consideration the circular risk. But I would like to stress two things. I mean, according to our experience, because what we are doing, as you probably know, I mean, we are lending money to the banks, as John already told you, and trying to introduce there this green and other things that should go to the companies in the end. And we are doing also direct lending to the companies, which we are trying to, not only in research and development, but also changing business model and, of course, energy efficiency and everything. And that can be done through different instruments, including the green bonds, which we have issued 2018, and we have there, let me say, 70 million probably, the only green bonds in this sense to get to the green projects. But the problems which we can see, and which are, in fact, the risk that we are facing is so-called trade-offs. Trade-offs between, let me say, black or brown and green on the other side. Because you cannot reach that, I mean, I will not talk about the energy sector, I'm not expert in this one, maybe you can see that differently, but when I'm talking about the classical sectors that we are financing, there this trade-off is not so easy. Even in energy it's not easy, because you can do solar wind energy, but on the other side you have in Slovenia as example TEŠ. I mean, you can coal industry, what you will do that. So this trade-offs is very, very, very important. Now, from our point of view, when we see the company which has, let me say, let me talk about the automobile industry. It was also mentioned by the excellence in sense of that what we will do, namely let's go on a big scale. Let me take Volkswagen as the #1 in the world, and let me take Tesla on the other side. The trade-off in Volkswagen is much bigger in sense of downside risk than in Tesla. Tesla started and he did their own car, very good, everything is perfect, go on, let me say. But what the Volkswagen has to do is they have their classical factory with 100,000 employees who are experts in this field. Now the question is this transformation. How will transform this factory to the electric factory or other factory you will need it? The same problem is on a micro level in, let me say, Slovenia in sense of companies. Because you have to find a way how to finance this thing, this transition, how to come from existing business model to the new one. Now, here there are a lot of obstacles. One of those is, of course, the price and the cost of this. There are also other ones which are concerning very much companies regarding the regulations. Let me take another example like CO2 tax, which we are all talking in Europe. What that means for the company. If you are importer and you will have CO2 tax on that what you import, or you will not be able to offset that, your business could be ruined. So we see that in this sense, when we are doing this, I would say financing and insuring, that are of course very, very, very important things to see what kind of trade-offs you can finance, how to do it. And of course, there are new industries, they have possibility to do that from the pika, I mean from the scratch, and there is no problem. But most of industries have to make this transition. And in this transition, we see that this is the way how we can really come there step by step, assessing the risks. And of course, what we do is, of course, we are not only assessing the risks in sense of that the company they're bringing all the things, but we can also assess those things which are coming in the future and what we can use as probably the best way of sharing this risk. And we advise to the company what to do, but sometimes the owners have different view. And we believe that only in cooperation with that, we have to be prepared to do it. Because if you set the targets that are too sharp for companies, they will never come there. You will never come there because they cannot fulfill it in this particular moment. So I'm sure that we have to take in consideration also these existing risks which are coming from the present situation.
Thank you so much. A very good insight. So, in helping companies transit, collaboration is key, but there is also another aspect that is decisive in many sectors, an active role of the regulator that can kind of lead as well in this transition. So I tend to ask Mr. Glob how he sees the role of the regulator in his sector. But before that, I would like to invite you to ask questions as well. Please, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure there are some questions from the audience. You're most welcome to raise it. It's very simple. You raise your hand, somebody will bring you a microphone, and the world will be yours. Are there any questions? Please. Yes. Please.
Who's asking? Chris.
Hi, Chris Werry, Radio Slovenia International. It's obvious to me some of the answers lie on that panel. I mean, the energy from Robert is just like, wow, I believe every word and it's amazing. And he needs to speak to the whole of Slovenia because it seems that that kind of energy is what we need. How do we get mindset changes? Mrs. Minion asked. And I think the answer is we've got to start telling the real people the truth. And I'm sorry, Barbara, you're going to hate me for this one. If I go back about 18 months, the real truth of electric cars were they would be more polluting than me driving my diesel car for 10 years, unless the batteries last longer than 10 years. So what we have to do, surely, to get the public on the banking side, you guys have to be the gatekeeper. You're going to have to work out what the truth is. And the public need to know the truth too. And it's really difficult to persuade people to be engaged in the green issue. 16 years ago, I built a house here. I tried to do it without concrete and without plastic, and without using energy sources that would cause an issue. Now, at that time, I went down the route of Toplotna Chapalka, but I built a house that was so eco-friendly in terms of not wasting energy that was a terrible waste of money, and I should have gone to electric. I need an independent person to talk to, not the one who's selling me the technology, but somebody I can come to find the real truth.
Thank you very much. We've had some answers to that through reporting, but definitely it's more than just dry reporting. It's also the narrative, the mobilization. Who would like to address that? Maybe, I mean, the two of you decide.
Ladies first.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very important point that was raised, and it is critical to provide support to the change, being attitude, but also financial. And that's why this taxonomy is extremely important. It's a first step. It is of crucial importance that taxonomy provides scientific data on how to measure actually the effects on the environment in different sectors of the economy, and not just taking into account elements in the part of the chain, but the whole, from origins onwards that you mentioned. And this is something that far exceeds the capacity of the banking sector. And if we do not, banking sector is not there to to be a scientific leader in all the economic
the arbiter of the
sectors.
scientific truth, yes.
It's absolutely to be able to measure, monitor, evaluate, but there's no capacity of technicians in the banking sector that would fulfill this. And that's why this taxonomy, again, is of such importance to do it right, and not only do it in Europe, but do it globally right. Because we come from understanding and truthful presentation of the facts, scientific facts, then also to the financing, assuring that there will be a balance with incentives also through capital, because some projects may be yielding high yield environmentally, some may not be yielding, and there we need other type of instruments to support this shift across the different branches. Now we've got first one. I would like to go back to the need for joining forces.
Yeah, so here we are coming back to Glasgow, right?
And not just that, it was also mentioned by Svilan and by Mr. Svilan and Mr. Denhoff that here we need to work together with companies, with the science, with regulators, all together. I mean, one sector itself will definitely be able to cope with the if we wish to have really results, truthful results, as it was.
Very well. Mr. Denhoff, then Mr. Golob, maybe also from the side point of regulation, active regulation, and telling the truth. And there's one more question that we can take if we are really, good in time, and then I think Barbara will tell me that will be it. So please prepare the last question. Mr. Denhoff.
No, I think the question about what is black and white, what is more or less polluting, when the clients start to ask that, that's the point when the scales will tip. Right now, the taxonomy is not ready. So the banks were faced with a simple decision. Do you wait for it, which you could easily do what's required, wait a year, wait probably 2 years, or you just start anyway with your own frameworks. And this is what we're trying to do, is lead by example. Even though we know a lot of the work we're putting into these characterizations and these trackings will be thrown away, but it's still 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You're still 1 step ahead. So I think the faster we get to that regulated taxonomy, it'll probably never be black and white. Life's just a little bit personal. Life's never completely absent of being subjective, but I think we can get to 2 or 3 shades of green, and that will be good enough.
Thanks.
Robert?
Yeah, it's both regulators and policymakers. They need to obviously make a stand and take a stance. The one thing, and I'll try to make it as blunt as possible, punish the polluters and support those who are not, whichever shade do they take. So this is the first rule. It's simple and it works. It will work, hopefully. It's not there yet. It doesn't matter whether the polluter is outside the EU or your own country, just punish him. Find a way to punish him. Second, that way you level the field. Market, obviously. The second one is, and I know it was already mentioned before, is the data. So the regulator and the policymakers, they do have the power to establish a framework how to get access to the data, which is there, but perhaps not collected, perhaps not stored, but it's there. And how to get that data accessible to those entrepreneurs who have the business models, the green business model, how to use that data to improve our lives. That is not the case at the moment. But these 2 things. So first is just support the investment in green, and second, enable the data from the customers. And this is something which will definitely, just drive the changes.
Understand. And Mr. Svilan, I think he would also add, and incentivize the trade-off, those who are in the deepest trade-offs, right? For taking it from last time. I'll give you the word, Mr. Svilan. Just
a small remark.
Yeah.
it's a Slovenian way to say we will support everyone and each one. It doesn't work that way. Sorry. No. So the trade-offs, I hate trade-offs. I say support those who are faster, who are braver, and who have a record of being more successful. In that way, that's how the civilization really progress. It's not by supporting those who just want to stand still and don't want to come out of their zone of comfort. That's not the progress.
Thank you, thank you. The last question, is there the last question? There's the last call. Is there a last question? Mr. Svilan wanted to add something, please.
Thank you. I think this question, the only one, is really the tough one. I have to say that we are considering this question for years in SID Bank. And personally, I'm also not very, I will say, optimistic. Namely, why? There are possibilities, like Mr. Glob said, and to support somebody, they are just, let me say, positive oriented, no. But today, ECG and everything what we are talking is very popular. We are all very kind of this and very keen of this, and let me say we are optimistic. But there is the real truth that there is not possible to support all. In this transition, that must be decided who will be not supported. It must be decided about, let me say, what is the price of CO2? Namely, why we are using CO2, let me say, industries and all the habits today so easily. Why? Because it's so cheap, because it's so easy to do it. Now, it is a big decision. I think it's one of the main topics in Glasgow. What to do with the price of CO2? Increasing this price means a big challenge for some part of industries. It means to say somebody no. It means to say new generations, you will not do the same like we did. You cannot use CO2 like we did. And this is the question about the truth, I think, that you asked. And this is something which we have to bear in mind all the time we are talking about that. Because climate change, ECG, sustainability, this is not just PR. It's not just to bring the customers to do the things better. It is like John said, we have to talk with them, we have to make common methodologies, we have to make collaboration how to do it. And in this case, the main and the most important thing is telling them the truth. Because the technological change will be long term. Everything what we are financing is 20 years. So in 20 years there will be change. What about in the middle? What about that, what we can do? So we have to be brave to tell our customer, our children, and to the world what exactly that means if we want to make this transition and to get there in 2050 to be net zero.
Thank you very much. If you agree, I think this was the conclusion, this was very well put, conclusion of this, I believe, very insightful dialogue. I would like to thank to all the speakers, Mrs. Zadravec-Capirolo, Mr. Svilan, Mr. Denhoff, and Mr. Golob for being here with us and sharing their views, their experience, and their motivation for what sometimes we simply have to do. And
thank you, Yuri, for great moderation as well.
But I would like also to say thank you for the wonderful introduction to the ambassador, and you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for your attentive listening, your question, and thank you, Barbara, for organizing all this with your crew, which was not an easy job. We've also had a speaker from remote, and we've been followed not just by this wonderful audience, but also to all those who are with us online, and we also wave to them, of course. Thank you.
Before we go, thank you very much to the panelists, and Yuri, just a few points of conclusion. So, the green industrial revolution has started, but we heard today, we are still brown, and we need a change of mindset and a change of attitude. And let's be positive. let's look for the green ocean, not the blue. I invite you again to join our initiative for a greener future with all the other British chambers in the world. Let your voice be heard, and you can be a role model also for other companies in the race to zero. Thank you very much for coming.